Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Inlay Terms. Today I have two special guests with me. Miss Melanie Bennett, how are you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm great, thanks for asking. And Mr. Shannon Boucher, am I pronouncing it right this time?
That's me. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Oh, thanks for coming on. Let's just jump right into it at the beginning. Just before we hit record, Melanie, you were telling me some big news.
Indeed. It appears that Danielle Smith has just released a video. I only listened to it before hopping on here, so I may not have all the details, but it appears that I think it's under 17 that gender affirming care or medical care will be banned in Alberta, and over the age of 17 that there'll be some restrictions with parental involvement in that. She seems to be taking a quite a reasonable stance, accommodating for people who wish to identify as trans and the care that they might receive. I think there was talk as well about getting some kind of indication that the minor that's over 17 might get some assessment to see that they're competently able to make those decisions. So I don't know, it seems pretty reasonable. I'd have to listen to it again, but what do you think, Shannon? Did you listen to it?
I like her even more. I mean, I'm not going to say I had a crush on Danielle Smith, but I find her very eloquent and charming. She communicates very, very well. This is an extremely difficult topic, and I think she threaded the needle. It's very hard, I think, to really find fault with her presentation. So if I sort of got this, some of the criticism seems to be she's still using some of the cult language, like trans women and trans girls. But I think there's a reason behind that. So there's no hormones or puberty blockers under 15. There's no medical surgery 17 and under. Teachers have to inform parents that if the child is changing their names, if they're, I think it's 17 or 18 or 16 to 18. So parents have to be involved. And under that, schools aren't allowed to socially transition kids at 15. And she took a stand on sports. So
Yeah.
male-bodied people aren't going to be able to compete unfairly in girls' sports for safety reasons and fairness reasons. I think she walked it very, very well. I was trying to imagine people like, someone like Doug Ford, with that level of charm and charisma and eloquence. And like, let's face it, she's a woman, and she comes across as compassionate and is delivering this, like in the interest of families and kids and what's best. And it comes through really, really well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was thinking when I was watching it that we've come so far with gender in Canada, inclusion into everything, and it overtakes so many things that, you do have people who are really, really invested in getting this as embedded into everything as possible. Then you're not going to bring it back by completely going the other way fully. You might say that that's the similarly ideological, who knows? But yeah, I also thought it was very fair. And what's wrong with being fair? At the end of the day, if we live in a free society, a so-called liberal society, a liberal democracy, I suppose there's space for people who wish to identify as trans if they want to. Like I don't see harm in that. And if there are guardrails in place and if there are protections in place, then yeah, I don't know. I think it's a smart move too, taking it step by step, really.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen it yet, so I'm a little
Well,
bit,
it's hot off
you
the
know,
press. Hot off the press.
yeah, but now I look foolish, like Payman didn't do his homework.
Well, no, when I
No,
say
no,
hot off
like
the press, I
just
literally
like,
got a link minutes before hopping on. What
yeah.
have you come across? What interested you in gender?
I'm not really like I don't actually look at the cultural side. I've been focusing more on like the dry legal side, the political side, the financial side. That's kind of why I wanted you guys to come on. I'm sure every one of my audience can tell that you're the experts in this field and I'm not.
Well, those are really
But
important factors. Very, very important factors. In fact, this weekend, so we're both part of a group called the Parents' Rights Coalition of Canada, which is a group of lots of different individuals and organizations who are focused on bringing a bit more sense back into this subject. And there was a first summit over the weekend, and part of that summit was a discussion about the law around parents' rights, or
Lack
how
thereof.
parents are placed between the system and their children. So these are really, really important things to understand as well. So you may teach me. So I'm not very familiar with. I learned something this weekend with Bruce Pardy's talk. He talked about the law, and I definitely learned quite a bit. And so I'm up for learning more about the law around this. Maybe you could enlighten me.
no, I think I oversold it there. Let's stick to you guys.
Legal
Here's,
opinion.
I would qualify a little bit because I don't believe that I'm an expert. I believe I'm a communicator, and I'm fortunate to be plugged into some true expert networks: medical professionals, clinicians, people who are teachers who are experiencing these things directly, and it's in their day to day. A lot of them can't speak publicly, and the topic of gender and gender identity is complex, and so the idea behind our weekly podcast is we want to communicate what's happening across the country. We want to be able to make that accessible to people. There's a lot of true experts. I mean, Melanie is a policy wonk. She's extremely analytical, and she can deep dive into these things. And we have people who are legal experts, medical experts, and those sorts of things. So I feel like we're just communicating, and that's the role that we've taken on in this culture war, because an awful lot of people can't communicate themselves.
I'm going to go and say that I'm also not an expert. I'm also a parent who was affected by this, which woke me up to what was going on. But I, like Shannon, decided that I wanted to speak out, and I got to know a lot of people. And certainly, yeah, there's a lot of really proper experts in our network, actually. And I think, for the most part, I feel like I'm a mouthpiece. I mean, I've developed my own insights. I don't know. I'm learning more about the policy and the ideology aspects of it as I go along. I've certainly been looking into it for some time before speaking out. But yeah, we're parents. I think it's really important, though, that those who can speak out do, to make it easier for those who can't to be able to come out, right? I think that's really, really important.
I should probably get in the habit of not using that word expert. It's been completely eroded the last 3 years. But the whole purpose of my show is I'm trying to encourage, empower, instill confidence in members of the community to come out and talk. When I say expert, like if someone's a building developer, a contractor, a welder, plumber, and they've seen firsthand the impacts of government overregulation, I just call them an expert because they know what they're doing more.
Subject matter. Yeah. I would go so far as to say we could be considered thought leaders. What do you think?
Fair enough. All right. So as thought leaders, how's this? I'll put two scenarios. One, I'm at a dinner party and I was talking to this woman. She's a mother, and and out of nowhere she lowered her voice. She said, "Payman, have you ever come across this?" And she said that one of their students' sons' teachers was trans, and we kind of talked about it. And I told her, like, listen, maybe it's best if you don't speak out because you're getting the problems. Another one is I was in a WhatsApp group, normally totally polar opposite of a responsible mother. You got these drunk guys, they're always talking about, oh, we drank too much last night. And then in the middle of that, some guy posts a picture of his nephew's high school book, there's these too much sexual pornography in there. Do you guys see this? Like it's happening more and more now?
Yes. I mean,
The conversation's certainly bigger, and more people are. It was a couple of years ago. It was kind of like a little nudge, like, yeah, Shannon, I hear what you're saying, but like I can't say anything about it. I'm glad you're doing something. And there was only a few people across the country that were sticking their heads above the parapet. Some people are still in real binds. I talked to, I was on a Zoom call. I mean, I'm on 2 or 3 or more a week, sometimes with parents and sometimes with teachers. And one teacher was saying, we're supposed to keep this secret. We've got 2 sets of books on the kids. We've got, the books that go to the parents, the report cards, and that's all with their birth names. But then we have this whole other set of spreadsheets, Google Docs that are shared by the faculty, the staff, on what parent knows what the pronouns are, what names are what, and everyone's supposed to play along with this game. And they're like, this is a vulnerable kid. And what some people in the system have said who've been in it for a while, one therapist comes to mind. She said, these are the same kids that were anorexic, they were bulimic, they were cutting. They have social issues, they're awkward, there's mental health problems, and they're the ones that are getting sucked into this. So this teacher was really conflicted. Like, how do I do this? Like, if I speak out, if I reach out to those parents, I'm going to lose my job. I want to protect that kid. So, what did we do? Well, we said, well, sometimes, a manila envelope with a typed label finds its way to parents, right? That this is happening. So to try and tip them off. People are finding a way to balance their conscience in these environments where they're kind of forced to compromise their conscience. And yeah, I mean,
a lot of people. Go on.
No. I want to circle
I
back
was
to the
just going
books,
to
but
add that just as if there's people who are behind the scenes wanting to speak but can't, I think there's still a lot of people that don't fully believe that this is actually going on. So whether their children are in school or they have their kids have friends who are maybe are trans, and they don't really understand how far the ideology has gone compared to when we were young, for example, or what they might understand that to be. So, they buy the line that this is an exaggeration. I think there's still a lot of people like that. And on the flip side, I view our job in some way is to try to show that this isn't an exaggeration, that these things, there are lots of leaks. So Chanel Fall, for example, is someone who has a Twitter account who is an ex-teacher who's constantly posting some examples of the ideology in schools, not just gender trans, but also, anti-racism and other parts of the ideology. And she provides really great examples, right? So it could be that, or it could be sometimes people leak stuff to us to share. So we just came across the Ontario Trans Affirming Toolkit for Ontario educators, and we talked about it this weekend on the summit, and we're going to be breaking it down and talking about it a lot more over the year, using the language that's coming from the academics, coming from the educators, and trying to share that with the public as much as possible. I mean, I think that there's a lot of that as well. Denial that it's as far as it is, or not fully understanding what's going on. I think there's a lot of that too.
it's hard to wrap your head around. I started a project 2 years ago with a leading Canadian AI research firm, and I managed to be able to collaborate with some leading thinkers in the pushback against trans ideology. Dr. Lisa Littman from the U.S., who was at Brown University at the time, and she's the researcher who coined the term rapid onset gender dysphoria that we know as ROGD. And a couple of other therapists as well. Lisa Morciano, who published in Quillette back in 2015 or 2016 about the presentation that she was seeing in girls. She identified it then as a social contagion. And we were trying to figure out what's the vectors here? And the idea was, or the thought was, that it's spreading online. It's through Tumblr and these social media platforms. And that was even kind of before TikTok had really exploded. And we use this AI to try and map out, is there persuasion? Is there clusters? Is there, encouragement? What are the structures of this? And then we started getting heat maps from like U.S. states, a map of the U.S., and you can see in dark blue where the conversation is happening around gender ideology and gender dysphoria. And wow, look, you can really draw clear parallels between red states and blue states. And then one of our advisors said, well, is there a correlation can we try and tie together comprehensive sex education and when that was introduced into schools, and how deep how rich these conversations are online in terms of the number of them. And that's what we're doing in Ontario. And it's absolutely mind blowing to think that, well, Soji has been in BC has been in the public mind for quite a while. But these things introduced into schools, introduced into vulnerable populations, and then kept secret when kids have questions. And it appears that it's actually institutionally vectored as opposed to online vectored.
They don't like it when you share what they're doing. That's the thing. You have people posting, so educators posting what the pictures of their classroom or some of the things that they're doing publicly on their Instagram pages or things like that. And then when you have people who see it, people like us who come across and will share that, they get really upset about it. They really don't like people sharing their own thing. They call it doxing and all kinds of things like that, which I find very amusing because this is you. You're posting this publicly. I see that all the time. Especially, there's a lot of hate towards people like Chanel for posting. She does get leaks, but she often does just post things that she finds on their own sites. I find that quite amusing. But I think it's also very telling because I think I think people who are pushing this understand that it's not well received by many people. And when you have someone who comes along and who isn't ideologically primed for this, who is presented with, say, a material or a school resource, and someone else explains from a different perspective, from a critical perspective, what's going on and maybe breaks it down, they really, really don't like that. Which is why I'm taking it upon myself right now to do just that with this toolkit that's come out, because I feel that, but I also feel that some people might not fully see or understand the issue with some of these resources or some of these things that are presented to kids unless it's translated, because it's not always obvious. So one of those things, for example, is how language is often very manipulated. We all know that diversity, inclusion, and equity mean the complete opposite. So people are starting to understand that some of this language is manipulated. But I don't think people always fully understand the magnitude of that. And so, I think it's really important for us to do that with the transforming toolkit. So I keep coming back to that. I have that on my mind. I've been working on it quite a bit this week. But yeah, I think if we can present what they're doing using their words, but translating and explaining why people are having an issue with this, I think that'll help illuminate this for many more people, if we can get the audience.
I was laughing there for a moment because you just described the creator of TikTok, that girl. She basically said exactly what you said. She goes, she would go to the left and she says, "You guys are doing this," and they're like, "No, we're not." So she had video that they posted, and she goes, "Here, you're doing it." They're like, "All right, fine, we're doing it, but there's nothing wrong with it," or like they'd have to find some way to justify it because it's not. Sorry?
Yeah, you're a bigot. Yeah, no, we're not doing it. You're just a bigot.
Well, it's just,
we're doing it, but it's actually a good thing we're doing it.
Yeah, like they'll either say it's a good thing or they get really angry. Like if they can't say, like if it's clearly child molestation, they can't defend it and they get angry. They're like, "Oh, this bastard outed us."
The narrative is not controlled, and if so, I have to I have to admit here, I'm an ex-progressive liberal. I absolutely was not only on the left but on the progressive left for many, many, many years up until recently. So a lot of dominoes fell for me, but what that does is it provides me, I think it provides me with an ability to understand where maybe many people are coming from or how they're thinking, because I definitely did some of that thought stopping, right? Like, oh, it's just those crazy right wingers. They don't know what they're talking about. They're exaggerating, or, immediately jumping to the defensive, right? So I kind of understand how a lot of people think. That doesn't mean I'm always, or haven't quite figured out how to then be able to communicate to people who are on the progressive side, because I don't know, I'm not entirely sure how I could have communicated to myself when I was thinking that way. But yeah, it's just I think there's a lot of inability to actually listen to an argument. I don't know. I've gone off on a tangent here.
Shannon, what about you? Were you born a hardcore conservative?
No, as a matter of fact, I still consider myself traditionally left of center. And I just think that what we think of as liberal has just gone way, way to the left, or
Yeah,
what's branded as liberal, right? I I've been working in finance for almost 25 years, and small business and entrepreneurship has been part of my life, my whole life. And so there's a little bit of fiscal conservatism in there that I understand pretty well. I personal responsibility is something that I walk in my life, and I raise my kids with those values. Even if they've forgotten them, they'll remember them, right? But I was on the left for quite some time. I mean, I worked when I first moved to Ottawa. I worked for the Sierra Club. I was volunteering there for almost it was probably 9 months. And a lot of the NGOs, like the Council of Canadians and some of these, environmental activist organizations and progressive social organizations, Indigenous issues were big for me. I did my undergrad honors thesis related to a big BC story from back in the mid '90s, the Gustafson Lake standoff. I don't know I think both of you are too young to remember what that was, but it was an international scandal. It was the largest deployment of RCMP in Canadian history against some people who were trying to do ceremony on I'm going to use woke language, or what sounds like it, unceded territory or disputed territory. And a classic movie Western, the rancher came in there and wanted the natives off the land, and the farmhands were like whipping bullwhips and firing guns in the air and yelling slurs and stuff like that. And so I was into the residential school issues and some of the settlement issues, and settler colonialism wasn't a term back then, but settler relations and encroachment and what my Indigenous friends called the newcomers, us. And so that was, I guess that's fairly traditionally left, which gives me a really rich perspective on what's going on now. Because I interviewed people who went to KIRS as part of writing my honors thesis. And I talked to them, and I was fortunate to be in, like healing circles, both, Western circles and in like sweat lodge with elders, and participating in cathartic process with people who had gone to those schools, Alberni School on Vancouver Island and Kamloops School and others who had suffered abuse, mental abuse, racial abuse, sexual abuse, but nothing like the narrative that we have now. It's so distorted. Like at the time I was trying to express to people, hey, this is going on. And I feel like that's a theme in my life. I'm trying to expose stuff, and trying to explain to people what, and I was writing, that was my degree, and trying to get published on these issues in the mid '90s, and just there was no taste for it whatsoever. And all of a sudden the switch flipped on that issue in 2021 with the news of the, I guess it was 21, news of the supposed graves, and I was like, whoa, something's wrong here. Like, why is this switch being flipped all of a sudden, and it's gone way past reality, into hysteria and genocide claims and all that stuff. So I don't know where I fit left and right anymore. I'm aiming for truth somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, me neither. I heard.
I
What's his name? I heard it called refugee. Refugee. I've adopted that term. I don't know if I'm right at all. I tried that hat. I don't know how it feels, but yeah, refugee for now.
So I'm kind of like Melanie. I was just like an extreme lunatic leftist in university, as everyone is, because university is free. Everything should be free. And then I got a job, and then started, being more right wing. But now I pick and choose. I'm more about property rights. Just leave me be. You want to be gay, do it in the privacy of your own home, and I'll have a gas stove in the privacy of my own home. Just don't regulate me. Sorry, that was just about me. But Melanie, I want to go back. You were talking about like how a lot of if you look at school like a consumer and a producer, so you have the school board that's pushing these policies that the parents generally don't want. Why do you think these people are doing this?
Because they're the expert class, because I heard a term called the managerial class and the expert class, right? So, and Bruce Party explained this much, much better than me. I highly recommend anyone go on the Gender Wars channel. At some point, there's going to be his talk up there, I hope. But he sort of explained that according to Canadian law, the idea of parental rights does not exist, which is something that I learned just this weekend. And so what does exist is this middleman between you and your child. Children have to go to school. There's no way out of that. You can't opt out of the educational system in Canada. And so the educators are the experts. They view parents as not providing or unable to provide for their children, unable to educate their children. So they have to go to school to be educated by the experts who know how to do these jobs. And so the parents, in a sense, don't really matter. It matters up to the educators decide what is the appropriate thing to be teaching children. So I'm probably leaving a lot. In fact, I know I'm leaving out a lot of detail in this, and it's not as sophisticated as it could be. But because essentially the parent is just the producer of a child, and the child then gets, I mean, crudely handed to the state, and the state decides what is most appropriate because they're the expert class. I mean, that's the gist of it, as far as I understand. That's what we're fighting for. I didn't realize how much we were fighting for it on a legal level, but, I'm a biologist, right? And all throughout nature, we understand that the more related you are to another individual, the more stake you have in saving your own genes, right? Reproducing your own genes. And that shows itself in all kinds of behaviors, protective behaviors. So parents throughout, all of nature, whether you're a spider or a seahorse or a human, the parents are the ones who typically are the most protective of their children. They have the most at stake, right? And so this idea that parents don't have any kind of desire or ability to know what's best to raise their children is absolutely ridiculous. Because, if nothing else, if you're just looking at the selfish gene, parents, teachers, they're transient. They come and go in children's lives. They don't have a stake in their lives. They don't, if something goes wrong, they're not responsible for it down the line. So they can, for example, with this ideology, you can insert all kinds of ideology, but you're not going to be there in 20 years to live through the consequences of what that's doing to this young person's life, which makes lots of sense, biologically speaking. And so this idea that, according to the law, there's no such thing as parental. Well, it's really about parental response. It's a stewardship. You're a child steward, right? You have the most stake in passing your genes on through your children. So morally speaking, naturally speaking, of course parents' rights exist, but every right has a responsibility. Rights don't exist on their own. You have a duty that comes with that right. And so the duty to care for your child is primordial, and it's an instinct. It's beyond most parents. There are parents who are abusive. That is a thing. There are all kinds of behaviors that are against normal behaviors in nature as well. But they're not the norm by far. And so what we have in Canada, we have laws. We know that some parents are not going to provide what's best for their children. We have things like, I don't know. So I've spent most of my life in the UK, so I don't know the ins and outs of the services available, but obviously there's a system of child protection, right? And so I understand that at schools, if teachers have maybe an indication that perhaps a child is not well cared for, because teachers, they do see the children very frequently. And as I understand, are often the first point of call to alert the authorities to some kind of abuse. And so those systems exist for that reason. But when it comes to gender and this ideology, the idea is that it's almost like this assumption that all parents are potentially or have the potential capacity to be abusive. And so instead of addressing that in any reasonable way, what they're doing is they're doing the secrecy policy. And, well, they could be abusive because some parents at some point in the past have been abusive to some children. And so we have to do this because we're the expert class and we see these kids out. So we know what's best. And so I feel like there's this conceit, there's this detachment, there's this feeling of superiority that needs to be addressed. And we right now, my understanding is we simply don't have the legal framework that reflects the natural reality of human society, of human beings throughout history. So I think I'd like to see that change.
In states, they have this idea in education of in loco parentis, which means that teachers and the education system have to act as a competent parent in place of the parent. And what I understood from Bruce on the weekend is we don't have that in Canada. And the presumption is, and like, I think that if the schools were true to their missions, which is reading, writing, arithmetic, raising kids up to be functioning members of society and participating and thriving members in the economy in an ideologically neutral framework, that would just be fine and dandy. And I think that's where the conception of this framework for the Education Acts came from. It's like, you can't work the kids on the farm all day long and not teach them to read. So we're gonna make you send your kids to the schools to get a basic education so that they can function better. And that's contributed to, GDP growth and standard of living, massive increases in the last, 100, 150 years. It's been a valuable tool. But there have been criticisms about the education system in that respect for 150 years. You can read about it in, Henry David Thoreau, famous essay on civil disobedience, and the book that it's often published with called On Walden Pond. And he talks about the education system, that it's only there to give kids enough education so that they can, meet the minimum, functioning standards in society. There's no interest in sending them to, Harvard, but not the masses anyway, because that's the job for the elites. And so public education was always a way of helping kids become functional in society so that they could get by and contribute to the economy. But when we think of a managerial class, there was an elite class that just thought the masses don't need to that level of education, that they might destabilize, and try and assert power for themselves. What's happened is, in the last couple of decades, as far as I can tell, is that the education, the role of teacher has been sold as a profession with the premise that you get to change the world. Okay,
I
so
want to say
you get to teach the next generation.
Yeah, I spoke to it. I had a really great conversation about just that with a teacher who moved abroad. I won't say which country, but he said he was a Marxist. He's an ex-Marxist. And that's exactly how he described the education, or how they teach teachers, is that they're telling them all the time that you are going to change the world. You're a teacher. It's your job to change the world. We have to completely change society for the better. And we have the tools for that. We have the knowledge. This knowledge is intersectional. This knowledge is anti-racism. This knowledge is transgender.
Well, it's not just anti-racism, it's anti-capitalist, it's anti-structure, it's anti-skill, it's anti-responsibility, it's anti-initiative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We know how to raise these really, really awakened individuals that are complete change. What they forget, though, is what they are changing society. They are changing society for the worst. The way that you described the education system clearly is designed for the country as well. It's a public service, because if you have a population that has at least a minimum ability to read and write, that's actually going to help the economy, right? That's going to help the country in general if your population is reasonably well educated. Yeah, they can think critically, they can do the math, they can run businesses and so on and so forth. But in this case, this is no longer helping the state. All it's doing is helping to undermine the state, undermine the country. We even have our prime minister saying this is a post-national state. Like, what is Canada anyway? There are no common values. Let's just push
we have
this
no identity.
Stuff. yeah, we'll just interject all this idea that we have to completely destroy society from the bottom up. In fact, Paulo Freire, who is the academic that underpins all of this anti-oppressive educational model, it was a Marxist, designed his educational or his anti-oppressive education for adults, but now it's used for kids. And in his seminal books, Pedagogy of the Press, he tells the reader in that book that he has designed these tools to educate, to create revolution from the bottom up. So this is the tools, I won't go into the details here, but these are the tools that are used to teach kids in schools. And what do we see? Well, Freire was obviously a very intelligent man, because we are seeing the production of little revolutionaries from the bottom up.
So you guys, I'm sure you know what this is, critical theory. It-
Yeah, critical theory is like an umbrella term. Pretty much a man called Herbert Marcuse sort of invented the idea of critical theory. It's really a way, critical meaning criticizing Marx, basically, this neo-Marxist way. And you sort of criticize something using like its opposite, sort of a negative, what he called negative thinking, and use the dialectic with a negative opposite, right? And so when we talk about, if you say something is racist, you keep calling something racist until you control it. So essentially, that's critical theory, using this Marcusean dialectic. So critical theory, this was from like the 1940s, 50s, possibly slightly earlier. So over time, that's just become all this other stuff. Now we have intersectionality. Well, intersectionality is just I think as James Lindsay explains it, if you have the genus, which is the critical theory, you have the different species underneath that, right? The different phylum underneath that sort of spread out from it. So now we have, genderism, we have anti-racism, we have so many, even like intersectional
critical feminist
feminism.
studies and yeah, critical race
They're all
theory.
critical. They don't always have critical in the name, but critical in the Marcusean sense of negative thinking. So critiquing in a negative way until you control it. Yeah. So
I was actually going there
big
as
thing.
well. I was going to mention James Lindsay. So critical theory is normally you have a problem, so you figure out what the cause of the problem is and you solve it. Like that's how people work, problem solution. Whereas in critical theory, you're like, yeah, just criticize, criticize, criticize until the whole thing collapses, and then, like you said, you control it. But I go ahead.
It's a bit more sophisticated than that. So I think you're talking about critical thinking. This is the manipulation of language, right? So the critical thinking that we're thinking of is gathering all the data that you can, and then start with a hypothesis. First of all, I have a question. Is the sky blue? Well, then I'm going to gather all the data to see whether or not the sky is blue, and then I'm going to use my rational faculties to decide based on the data whether it's blue or not. That's what we call critical thinking. That's what we used to teach. But critical theory still has critical theory. This is all over the curriculum. It's all over educator materials. They sell this to parents. We're going to teach your kids to think critically. What that means is critical theory, which is what you're talking about, which is starting with the answer. And this is the Freirean method. There is oppression. There is oppression. We know there's oppression. But based on Freire, we have to uncover that oppression. We have to figure out where it is. We have to use praxis, which is the practical application of the ideology, to uncover the systems of oppression. Then we use dialogue. Then we discuss that oppression. And so throughout this process, you have all this conscientization. So the long and the short of it is really, it's one of them is starting with a hypothesis and then analyzing it, the empirical method. And the other one is starting at the end point, starting with the answer. There's oppression, and then sort of fitting in the information to make that true, right? Sorry, I cut you off there, but the critical thinking is just another language manipulation.
I was just going to say it's completely ludicrous. I thought it was just garbage that's only in the universities, but the Canadian Armed Forces, they just came out with a journal. Have you read the Canadian Armed Forces, that journal, the infamous one that got released a few months ago?
I've been focusing on the education system mostly because what I'm trying to do personally is I've come to so I'm an ex-academic, and in the sciences, And then when I kind of discovered this stuff, I wasn't in social science at all. And then when I discovered this, I was like, what on earth are these people going on about? And became really, really fascinated with the stupidity of all of this stuff. And so I spent a lot of time looking into it. And, it is everywhere. And I feel like someone has to try. Well, I mean, look, a lot of people are explaining this to normies, I guess. But in Canada, somebody needs to look at the stuff that's going on in Canada and translate that for the regular person, right? Like you were saying in the military. Well, that's not surprising because everywhere, once you understand the terminology and the ideology and how it functions, you just have to turn over a rock and it's everywhere you look. But to the normal person, when they're saying, oh, we're thinking critically about this topic, you're like, well, that makes sense. Of course we want to think critically. And so they look the other way. But obviously, if you've spent some time understanding these sorts of things, then you go, okay, well, red flag, what do you mean by that? And you continue reading, right? Anyway, I've gone off on one about critical thinking. No, I have not read what's going on in the military, but surface level, we've seen obviously the tampons in the toilets.
Yeah, that's not helping. But I like your analogy of you start with the conclusion and then work your way back. Shannon, over to you. They just they tried to recall the Minister of Education for BC and they failed.
Yep.
What happened?
There's a couple of things happening. I think that Amrit Buring, I have to commend him for his efforts. To take the initiative to move that ball forward. Conservative member of Parliament, I think is a member Legislative Assembly in BC from Abbotsford, I think, read from one of these books in the libraries back in September. In the legislature, and the Speaker of the House said, like, you have to retract those words. And he said, well, if these words are unbecoming of this House, how is it that we can have this book in libraries where middle school kids have access to it? How is that appropriate? And there was an exchange between him and Rachna Singh and David Eby, premier, and they humiliated themselves trying to defend these things, talking about age appropriate and what have you. And there was a lot of mobilization in the Sikh community, from what I understand. We have some friends out there, it may be more present in the news for you guys in BC than it is out here in Ontario for us. But I think that the woke did their job on one hand by attempting to marginalize and stigmatize the protesters and their mission. And I also think that Amrit failed, and that there were some things that undermined their campaign. Like if we opened up today with talking about Danielle Smith and her presentation of a new gender policy framework in education and healthcare and sports in Alberta. And you have to kind of walk a line in politics. And there are some people who just, it's like when I was in writing school and art school, and nobody wanted to touch money because that was just impure, right? It's the art that's important. And there are some activists where, I got to say the truth no matter how unvarnished the truth is. And we have to recognize that there is a set of language that's going to be more palatable and more accessible to the public. And it's going to be less assailable by other parties. And so I think probably a number of things could have helped that succeed. I think they got about 40% of the signatures that they actually needed for the recall. And it was, I think, a great exercise. And just like everything that's been happening in the last couple of years, like speaking up raises awareness. It gets people to ask questions. In that respect, I think it was a terrific success. There were 24-hour-a-day protests going for a couple of weeks in Surrey and Abbotsford, and 2 protests a day and cycling. And so it's become part of the conversation in BC much more than it was, a year and a half ago. And this is just a stepping stone. I expect that it's going to get bigger and bigger as a topic in BC, and that we'll see a consolidating narrative come along where people who can speak to the issue competently will rise to the top as communicators. And some of the people with more, I mean, we're talking about very traditional religious views. And when we were participating in the Million March for Kids, or the Hands Off Our Kids March back in September, and working with organizers across Canada, seeing some of the attitudes of the Muslim community, where traditional Muslims make no distinction at all between the LGBTQSI, like they're all the same. It's all bad. We don't accept, we tolerate it. We don't accept it. That's the language that they use. We'll do our thing, but don't put that in front of our kids, and we'll mind our own business was sort of the deal. And there's a lot of traditional religious values that are unpalatable in public discourse. And Canada is in some ways worse than the U.S., where that's just a no-go for a conversation. We're not even going to talk about the existence of that debate. So the traditional social conservative, religious conservative has a hard time getting traction, and I think that's where some of the where this fell down.
You didn't say it, but I'm gonna be real controversial and come out and say it. Basically, that campaign decided to go down the avenue of basically saying that all of the gay stuff gone, all of the gay stuff gone. Not exactly with those words, but basically that sentiment. And I think that put off a lot of people, because there are many who have been saying for a long time, the queer and trans is very different. The TQ is very different from LGB. Even you have Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, LGB Alliance. There's the Northern Lights Alliance. There's all kinds of groups that are fighting against this. Gays Against Groomers, right? And, the trans culture, like, they're coming for you too, and there's all this stuff going on, and you have people like me who definitely agree that this is a queer problem. This is a problem of queer theory, which is a critical theory, the way that you were describing. And then when you have groups that come out and basically say, yep, it's all the gay stuff, don't want the gay stuff, bye-bye, that does cause a lot of discomfort with a lot of people, and I can understand that. And in Canada, we've accepted that for a really long time, and I think that they are, when stuff like this happens, when the trans concept takes over and it becomes, you're just not allowed to talk about it, and you're vilified, then people who are fighting back against this, I think, if you keep saying there are homophobes, look, there are homophobes, there are transphobes, there are homophobes, there are transphobes, eventually those kinds of people are going to show up, and they're going to show up loud, right? You sort of like, you magic that imaginary left-wing enemy into existence. And I think we're possibly starting to see people feel very comfortable showing their intolerance in that way. I don't know how much of an impact that had, because I think they were struggling to get the votes before that. But then I'm not there. I don't know how loud they've been about this particular topic. But that's the thing. I agree with you. But with Danielle Smith, I think it's it's clever, but it's also, if you're coming from a liberal perspective, not a now liberal, but an actual liberal, a classical liberal or libertarian or whatever. If you're coming from that perspective, you have to accept that there are other people who are different to you, and we can all exist together along this common framework, right? But we don't go around society denouncing or trying to control other people's morality. Anyway, I'm going on a rant here, but yeah, I think unfortunately this ideology is, in many respects, because of their behavior, because of this, frankly, toxic behavior, sort of bringing about this enemy that they've been calling out. This ghost enemy has decided to appear.
Yeah.
What would you guys say to just either outright privatization of schools, or have charter schools, but like don't have the money is flowing up to the provinces, and then you got to claw it back, and the province says, all right, I'll give you your money back, but here's the curriculum, eat it. So like, what would you say to just pushing all that to the community, so if you're in a gay community, well, more power to you, and teach whatever you want. And if you're in a Muslim community, you send your kid to Muslim school. It's your money. What would you say to that, Melanie?
This is definitely not my area of expertise. I think that's a Shannon question. I think my understanding is that the structure is not the same in Canada as it is in the US. So, yeah, that sounds like a Shannon question.
Along the lines of the left creating boogeyman that they are afraid of, and those things suddenly popping into existence. There, in spite of my criticisms of public education, if it weren't captured by ideologues and it served its function, like it should be a resilient institution. But what we have now is dysfunction, a systemic dysfunction, to borrow some words. And there are only a couple of options. If you want to prevent your kids from being indoctrinated at this point, you can inoculate them on a regular basis, which means you have to understand the language. You have to understand the stories that they're telling at school, and you have to be able to teach your kid some intellectual self-defense tactics to either quietly just ignore what's happening or and nod along, or you've got to think, okay, I got to get my kid out of the system. And getting our kids out of the system is costly, right? It's costly in terms of our own time. If we're going to try and homeschool, it requires much more engagement than the public school demands right now. Like for decades, we've just kind of thought, hey, well, we'll send our kids to public education. They're in great hands. They're going to learn how to read and write, and we'll get them out at the other end. And that's just not a sensible thing to do anymore. We have to be a lot more engaged and aware. The charter school system, for those who don't know, is an opportunity for people in a community to come together and create a board and develop a charter for that particular school. There's some good examples in Alberta right now, classical schools. And I wish I could remember her name. She is just an amazing woman. Classically educated herself. She's teaching, she's got 2 schools in Alberta. And they're teaching classical philosophy and poetry, and you read the Aeneid and rhetoric and learn truly critical thinking skills, memorization and of poetry and analysis of language and Latin, like the stuff that my mom talked about, the kind of education that she got when she was young, and she was in like Outport, Newfoundland, but there was this sort of high-minded view of what education is. Now, schools can come together with a charter and say, well, we're going to create a school around athletics. And, we're going to have our core curriculum, and then we're going to have an athletic program or a music program or an arts program. And the idea behind them is that people often talk about charter alongside a voucher system. So a voucher is like every butt in the seat in a school in my school zone in Ottawa is worth about $13,100 a year. So when a kid goes to school, the school gets their allotment of money, $13,100, to educate that child. And that's taxpayer dollars. It's collected from our property taxes and redistributed through, the province, deployment. Well, that voucher idea is that if you want to put your kid into a charter school, the charter school has to meet certain requirements, that you're going to meet curriculum, and then you can do your own thing on top of that, whether it's that art school or the athletic school or classical school. And here's the check that goes along with it. And so the board of the charter school gets to deploy that, and then they're responsible for finding your location, whether it's a church basement or whether it's a community center needs to be redeveloped, and there's a bunch of responsibility that goes along with administering it. But it can be, and it should be, an opportunity right now with all of this corruption in the system. Now, there's no guarantee that a charter school or a private school or even homeschooling is going to escape woke indoctrination. There's a great school in southern Calgary. I want to say it's in southeast. A longtime friend of mine is an administrator and coordinator there, and it's arts and music. Just a great facility, and it's something like a public-private isn't quite the right word, but because they've built a theater and they've built amazing music facilities like and a track, they lease it out to other users. So it's used in the evenings by theater groups and on the weekends, and are very stringent on the kinds of teachers that they take in. And they're kind of flying under the radar of being anti-woke, and everyone kind of agrees we're not letting that into our school. So they built some fences around it, but that's no guarantee that an institution wouldn't get captured. So, charter schools can be a good idea, but if they get, captured by the same forces, then it's just, it's not solving the problem.
Yeah, but the concept of the charter school, though, would be if you want to create a woke school, then it's up to you. And if somebody else wants to create a religious school, then they can create their religious school. The point, I guess, is allowing people to decide for themselves what kind of education they want to provide. I wouldn't be sending my child to a woke school, but maybe someone else would like to. Then they can, and then using liberal values, they can compete on the open market in the job market and see who does best. I don't know. I feel like that will sort itself out.
If you want to turn out little militant neo-Marxists, you go. Here's your check. Go do it.
So long as we have the opportunity not to do that. Right, and then we can allow meritocracy or the market to sort that out. I feel very confident in my position in that case.
I kind of believe that what de facto is happening now is that people who can afford to get out of the system, or who are committed enough to make the sacrifice, are taking their kids out of the system. So again, I'll use my school zone as an example, but others in Ontario are the same. An unexpected drop in enrollment, unexplained. It was 1,700 students in Ottawa last year out of 70,000, which is more than 2% of the student population that they expected isn't there, which creates funding shortfalls for them. And well, they can't really figure out why. But what happens is that the ideological concentration continues to happen, and it unfortunately disproportionately affects families of lower means. So we're talking about, single parent households, and we're talking.
I imagine that would. Yeah, I imagine. I don't know if there's any studies on this, but I could very well imagine somebody who's already going through a difficult time. Like, so for example, if you have a low income, right, that you would be very, very vulnerable to the idea of being that victim and gaining some kind of like points for being that victim. But then again, I suppose on the other side, it would also be if you're white, cis, heterosexual male, and you feel, like you're the bottom of the rung in society, then that would also be appealing, even if you're middle class, to, claim that you're a trans woman. I don't know. I'm going off on one now. I guess it would appeal to a lot of people. But I imagine if you have difficult circumstances to begin with, that would be quite appealing.
So I think you guys answered that beautifully. You kind of took opposite positions, but the audience is going to like that. I'll end it with one question, and prepare yourself for this. How much of what we're seeing in the schools is because of the proliferation of internet pornography?
Chicken or the egg question. I mean, I don't know that we're seeing it in schools because of online pornography more than. So there's the way that I understand it is that you have comprehensive sexuality education, and then you have queer and trans ideology. It's basically, they call it transgender studies, and that's kind of what's infusing itself, and it's sort of mixed in with a bit. It comes from queer theory, but it's really transgender ideology that's in the schools, and that is different from the comprehensive sex ed, even though they sort of mix together in some way or other. But for example, what you're talking about is more the comprehensive sexuality education, which says that we need to teach children about their own sexuality, because the ideas that we're born sexual beings and it's to help them, but also they're going to have sex anyway, so we might as well introduce it to them. Or with the porn, for example, we might as well, teach them about safe access to porn because they're going to access it anyway. Like, that's more comprehensive sexuality education. But then you also have a bit of infusion of queer theory in there too. I think it's a little bit complicated, but when it comes to trans, for example, like the sorts of books, so the sex books, I think is very much related to that. But when you hear about books, I think it's called the Red Crayon. So it's for kindergarteners, and it's this red crayon that believes that they're really a blue crayon, and they've always felt like a blue crayon. And so everyone says they're red, but they're really blue on the inside. So obviously that's talking about transgender ideology.
Really? It's not talking about a Republican, a closeted Democrat is really a Republican?
Never thought of it that way. But this sort of, so
it's a double meaning.
Right? Yeah, they're both related but different all at the same time. But both of those things together happening at the same time is this hypersexualization of children. And Rakna Singh, when she was addressed in the legislature in BC, repeatedly said, these books are age appropriate. These books are age appropriate. They're age appropriate. Well, if you read, as an example, a very seminal queer theory paper from the University of British Columbia from a man called Keenan Harper and Little Miss Hot Mess, who's a drag queen, they wrote Drag Pedagogy. I can't remember the rest of the title, but in there, they explicitly tell you what they mean by age appropriate. So what they mean is age appropriate is about making the topic digestible for that age, not whether or not this is appropriate developmentally speaking for that child. It's how do we get it in front of the eyes of the 5-year-old in a way that 5-year-old will really understand this. That's what they mean by age appropriate, right? Or family friendly is another one. Family friendly does not mean this is PG 2, not parent events. What is it, like whatever? Family, is it family? I don't know that title for family friendly, but it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean bring your kids. This is super wholesome. Everybody loves it. What it means is it is friendly for the queer family. It's about developing queer families, and you see this sorts of things in queer theory papers all the time. They're not going to say that explicitly when it comes down to schools and education and so on and so forth, but over and over and over in the queer literature, it is telling you this stuff. Again, some of the language
and that's been going back decades and decades.
Yeah. So when you mix that sort of age-appropriate, family-friendly, in the queer sense, mix that with some comprehensive sexuality education, which is, well, we're all born sexual, and so we have to help children develop themselves sexually in an age-appropriate way, or as early as possible, then you get those books, right? Well, they're going to masturbate anyway, and so we might as well read a book about masturbation. It's not
to
suitable
kindergartners.
For consumption. Yeah. So those two things married at the same time, but I think they're both they're two different things happening in parallel and making each other worse. That's how I understand it.
Yeah, I would speak to the other side of it, because I think, like pornography was one of the first, what's the right word? Catalysts for the expansion of the internet. Right, the original DARPA internet. They were watching the coffee maker in the other room on the camera, but pretty soon, like the internet became, little clips of videos that was sharing pornography, and a huge amount of internet. What?
Pam and Tommy Lee.
Yeah,
fair enough. Yeah, and a huge percentage of the traffic on the internet is pornography. It really stimulated the expansion
Did you know there's a rule for that?
A rule?
Do you know there's a rule? I can't remember the number of the rule, but it's like Rule 32 or something like that. Do you know what that is?
I remember Rule 34.
Rule 34.
It's funny, I remember Rule 33.
No. Okay, so we all know.
Is it like
God.
a certain number of exchanges in a communication, and someone's calling somebody a Nazi rule kind of thing?
Oh my God, no. Okay, I'm sorry. I had to cut you off. I can't remember the number of the rule. I'm sure someone in the audience will remember. I'm sorry, I'm not big enough of a geek, but it's rule number whatever, whatever. And it's basically, if you can think about it, there is porn about that on the internet. That is the rule.
That's 34. That's rule 34. That's the only one you need to know.
Okay. Well,
That's
what
how important
ubiquitous
porn is to the
porno
internet.
ubiquitous pornography has done is it's largely desensitized us to explicit and graphic sexuality, and we have now a generation that's come into adulthood that I want to say they were raised on porn, but porn was certainly accessible to them, and so they don't think about it in the same puritanical terms. I mean, I grew up in an Orthodox Lutheran church in Richmond, BC, and that's we got the mustn't touches and things you don't talk about, and all of that stuff is bad. It's sinful, and we had a broad culture that held on to those or perpetuated those kinds of values for really important sociological reasons. Because if you make sex for teenagers a taboo, the theory is anyway, you reduce pregnancy. Whether that works or not is debatable, but the subject of sex was really off limits. And now, as soon as a kid gets a smartphone, they're going to figure out how to, especially boys, are going to figure out how to access porn. So we have now a generation into adulthoods, it might be fair to say in their 30s, who just, this is second nature. This is just how it is, and why should we worry about a 12-year-old or an 11-year-old boy who's surfing porn on the internet? Why should we care? That's just normal. So we've desensitized ourselves from a more traditional puritanical religious culture, and I mean every religious tradition has some norms and taboos around sex to prevent unwanted pregnancy or unplanned families and that sort of thing. Some to a more rigorous and totalitarian degree than others. But we've lost all those boundaries, and so I think to answer your question, and to complement Melanie's explanation of queer theory, we have these two things happening in parallel, and it's not a good combination.
Melanie, I think.
I wanted to end on just today, following on from what you were saying about the ever presence of porn online. I think Mark Zuckerberg was in the American Parliament, Congress, or whatever it's called in America, defending Meta today about, I think the senator, whoever it was saying that a really high proportion of young girls in the past week of this particular study had received unsolicited, explicit material on Facebook. Anyway, I just wanted to add that. So yeah, it's not just the young boys; it's even young girls approached in all kinds of inappropriate and unsolicited ways. And I guess you grow up, you get used to it. I don't know, but yeah, it's pretty pervasive for the young people, for sure, in a way that absolutely was not for me or for you.
I saw this meme the other day. This picture of this old guy. He says, "My Wi-Fi is slow. Either my son is downloading porn or my daughter's uploading it." It affects them both.
I feel evil if I laugh.
Yeah.
I guess we could end it on that note. But do you have any a message of optimism or some advice you have for people who want to make change and take back their school system?
I have the pleasure of getting to know. So I was pretty black-pilled before starting to talk to people, and I was like, I have to join groups, I have to speak to people, I have to do something. This stuff is insane, it's crazy, oh my God, what the hell, our society is falling apart. But I've had the pleasure of working with very, very clever, dedicated people. Just regular parents, regular individuals who also had the same sense they had to do something about it. And, I think we've forgotten that Sometimes it's the simplest actions that can have a huge impact. When I was in the UK recently speaking to some friends, they were like, well, what can we do? We can't become prime minister. We can't change the world. And in some sense, if you look at it like that, sure. And I think a lot of us feel that way. Well, we can't do anything. Everything's going to shit. Sorry, I swore. And so I'm not going to do anything at all. But we actually have an awful lot of power. And if you, especially if you meet up with other like-minded individuals. So the small steps, I mean, letter writing. You know, our ministers, our politicians, they don't receive a lot of mail as far as I understand. And when they do, they take it fairly seriously. And so if there's, let's say you have a group of 50 parents in your region that have get together and you're like, this is not okay. Well, if every one of those parents writes a letter, that's 50 letters to the local politician, that's going to make a really big impact. You can meet, so your politicians are supposed to meet with you. You can approach them and tell them you want to talk to them about stuff. Right? You can go to your board meetings. You can go to parent council meetings. You can involve yourself at the local level. And this is what I've really come to understand, is that we've forgotten that local action does make a huge difference. And think about it on the other side of the coin. If you are not woke-minded and you're upset about what's going on, it's because we've allowed this situation to happen. Well, how did it happen? They didn't arrive from the top, right? They come... These ideologues, these woke ideologues, for the most part, have gotten involved in things like unions. They've gotten involved in their local council meetings, talking about all the boring stuff. They've become trustees of school boards. So all of those things that are accessible to you, you can do that. And especially if you are working with other people, or if you meet up with other people in your local area, it's really helpful, one, for the support and to keep the morale up, but also that's how we win. And I see it all the time. And I didn't see it before, but I do see it now. And there are plenty of successes. And I would say there's a small group in Canada that I see that are working together. And I've seen really positive change in a very short amount of time. I mean, I got involved. I was one of the people who got involved very, very early on in putting together the Million Marches. And I saw it develop from beginning to end. And that was massive. Now, it took on a life of its own. I'm not going to take responsibility at all for the whole thing. I mean, this was exceptionally grassroots. But that's another example of something really, really successful. But that started with a man in Ottawa who had a few conversations with a person here, a person there. A few of us got involved. And that happened. And it happened through conversation. It happened through people wanting to do something, right? So I just want, if I can share with anyone, is that if you don't like what's going on, then it is within your power beyond tweeting to do something about it. We just have to relearn how to actually take action, write letters, real, tangible action in the community.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in steps even simpler than that. And that is just simply talking to people, talking to your family, talking to your neighbors, talking to your coworkers, talking to people that, parents of your kids' friends. And there's ways to softly introduce this. Well, there's this Million March thing, like there's a lot of talk about this. Where do you sit? You gotta have test things out a little bit. But the more we talk about these things, the more permission we give other people to talk about them. And it took a few of us a couple of years ago. So I stood up in late 2021 and started putting stuff up on Facebook. I have quite a broad LinkedIn connection network that's focused locally in Ottawa, about 1,500 people in the business community. I started writing stuff about DEI. I started talking about pronouns. And I went to a local woman who's made an incredible contribution. Her name is Pamela Buffoni, and she created the Canadian Gender Report. It's genderreport.ca. And I said, Pam, I got to think of something to do here. I can't do nothing. And I'm thinking I'm going to put my name out there and talk about this. She's like, well, I don't know if that's the right thing to do, but Billboard Chris is coming to town on the weekend. Maybe you should reach out to him. So Chris and I and Chanel Fall, who was at the time was below, she wasn't public yet. She'd been suspended and was being investigated by the by the teachers' college here in Ontario, and we went out with Billboard Chris, and we were mobbed by 300 activists that were whipped up by a local politician, municipal council, Catherine McKinney, and an MPP named Joel Harden, and the Ottawa School Board sent letters to like the entire population of parents of the 72,000 kids in the board saying, no place for hate. These are bigots and these are horrible people. And so we got mobbed. And in spite of that, that actually catapulted me into saying, okay, like I'm now even more committed to doing something. And so I chose to run for school board. And I was pretty sure I wasn't going to win, but the whole idea of getting out and running for school board was that I got an excuse to knock on doors. I got an excuse to talk to people. I got an excuse to get into the media and hold them accountable for the lies that they're telling. And we developed some strategy, and people all across Ontario and BC, more or less the same time, did the same thing. And we pushed the acceptable narrative. We opened up the Overton window on the subject. And there was only handfuls of people doing this 2 years ago. And then in September last year, we had tens of thousands of people out because they're all feeling the same thing, but there was no one to give them permission. No one wants to be the first penguin off the edge of the ice shelf, right? Because there might be seals or, killer whales or whatever down there. And everyone's kind of jostling, like, who's going to go first? Who's going to go first? And a few of us did. And the more of us that do, the easier it is to talk about. We diffuse, the capacity to be attacked. When it's only one or two people, everyone's getting attacked, and the whole mob is descending on those couple of people. But when we have tens of thousands across the country, there's just no way that these activists, who are very small in numbers, can get traction and hold their narrative. They're not going to be able to hold on to their hysterics in Alberta, because what's come out is just so sensible and common. The average person is just going to say, like, now we see that you're radical. You're not running the show anymore. You're not controlling the media narrative. You're not shutting down everybody who dares to question this. We all dare to question. And so, don't. And one of the things that Melanie and I have been doing, we co-host the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. We've been doing that as a YouTube show for the last 6 months. And for 6 months before that, I was writing that report as a weekly on a Substack called Woke Watch Canada. And that too is part of getting the word out. And there's a lot of tremendous writers and researchers. And, we talked about James Lindsay earlier. James is like, he's that uber intellectual, super smart guy. And then there are the people, his audience. And then there, are the translators who are trying to bring it down into accessible language so that everybody can get what's going on. And then everyone who gets that can start talking to more and more people about it. And that's how you change the world. It's one person at a time, more or less.
Well, that's an amazing story. Thank you. Melanie, thank you as well. You guys are both doing God's work. You're doing great stuff. Keep it up. I just wanted to thank you guys for coming on.
Well, thank you. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for having us. Yeah. Good luck out there in BC.
Yeah, we'll need it. Bye, guys.
Bye.